Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres, and obviously I'm back in the kitchen. In one of my last videos, I promised you that I was going to make something cool that you've never seen me make before. Now it's not really hard. If you can mix a few simple ingredients together, you got it covered. Before I get started, I'm going to do a couple more things here. I need to get out one pan. Put it on the stove and get some peanut oil in it. This is not an immersion thing, it's just a good coat of peanut oil on the bottom of that pan. I would guess about 3 tablespoons, maybe 4. I'm going to keep extra there in case I need it. I've got my bowl, I've got my ingredients, and I'm going to show you what I made the other day and what I'm going to make tonight. So I'll be right back. That's what I made the other night. And what this is these are wontons. Now, if you are fortunate enough to not have much in the way of allergies, you can buy all kinds of Chinese dumplings frozen. Unfortunately, we have 2 issues, one of which is a significant percentage of the wontons and pot stickers and other things like that that they sell, unless we're willing to drive like an extra half hour past that hour that we need to drive to get to a decent grocery store, they have canola oil in them, and I am allergic to canola oil, so that's a no-no. And years ago, I used to make my own, and I decided a couple of days ago I was going to go back to doing that. They're not hard. And now I have frozen wonton. Let me stick these back in the freezer. Now, you may ask, what will a home cook do with frozen wonton? Well, I use them for the same things that I would use to make fresh wontons. And that is, I would either stick them in soup, or I would use them as an appetizer. Either way, they're awesome. Now, the last batch of wontons I made were made just with pork. And super simple recipe. Half a pound of pork, 2 tablespoons of chives, or some other onion product. So, like, I have chives in the garden. If I hadn't had chives, I would have used leeks, because I have leeks in the garden. If my leeks were not an option, and I had green onions, I would use those. Each of those is going to give it a slightly different flavor. Some people use scallions, so, there's a bazillion different little things you can use like that. Just something in the onion family, because you need something that's got a little bit of a get up and go to it. And chop it finely, whatever you're using. Like I say, right now, our best bet is we have a stack of chives in the yard that are still looking good. So, yeah, I just got my scissors and went out there and chopped off a couple. After I add the chives, I add a tablespoon of soy sauce, a 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper, a tablespoon of finely chopped garlic, a teaspoon of finely grated ginger, and a teaspoon of cornstarch. If you find that a teaspoon is not quite enough, you can do up to a tablespoon. Sometimes you find your meat and other stuff is a little wetter than other times, and you want it to sort of, I don't know, harden up a little bit, I guess you'd say. Get sucked up a little bit by the cornstarch. Some people use, well, here's the basics. When I started researching wontons a bazillion years ago, I discovered that wontons were like apple pie. Every family has their own variety. And China is a huge country, and various types of dumplings like that are made in other Oriental countries, other Asian countries besides China. So, thinking that you're going to find one recipe is crazy, crazy, just like thinking there's only one recipe for applesauce. I mean, apple pie. I have, let me clean this out. This time around, I decided that I was going to add shrimp. I have found wontons made with just about every type of meat and seafood and everything else you can imagine. I'm going to chop it up, finally. These were just, we don't get fresh shrimp where we live. These are frozen. I simply defrosted them in cold water and then rinsed them a couple of times. Unfortunately, I was not able this time to get totally unadulterated shrimp. These have one of those keep it fresh sort of things in it. I don't like that. Some of those can upset my stomach, so I try not to get weird things in my... I prefer when it says something like shrimp and, oh, salt. Okay. But sometimes you don't have that option, so you go with what you got. I decided I would put in, along with my pork, about 8 of these shrimp. I just sort of eyeballed the quantity because that's honestly how most of these things are done. I also added the crunchy part of the leaves of pak choi. I could have added something else. I could have used water chestnut. I could have used... Well, I could have used celery, but I don't usually care for celery in Chinese food. To me, it's a cheap filler like you get at some of the crummier Chinese restaurants. I was looking for a mild, cabbagey sort of a thing. So for me, the crunchy part, the stem sort of part of pak choi was perfect. It comes down to they used what they had on hand. I just happened to be in the process of making soup when I was doing this. And I actually cooked the wontons in the soup. So I'm adding a half a cup of shrimp. And this is my previous pork mix. Bloop. That's the same mix as what we have in those wontons you saw. Here comes the messy part. But the easy part. Let me get my hands clean. Hands clean have to be, because it'll all get sticky otherwise. I'm going to start my oil, and I'm going to put it on low, which on this stove is not low at all, but that's okay. I am going to, usually I use mostly white cloth towels when I cook, but for something like this, it's time for paper towels. Now, first things first. Make sure I have a dry surface, because I just made a mess of this with the shrimp. I don't want my wonton wrappers to stick to it. Wonton wrappers have some white stuff on it to keep them from sticking together, and that white stuff is corn flour. That's what they would call it in Great Britain. Cornstarch in the United States. If you are not a meat eater, you could use any kind of meat substitute. They recommend, I think they recommend extra firm tofu. They're calling it high protein tofu. I would say a firm tofu, because you don't want it mushy. Okay, big trick. These have to stay not dried out. We live in a super dry climate, so I'm not going to take out most of them until I need them. I'm also going to have a little cup of water and a spoon. And I'm going to mix that shrimp in with the previously concocted pork that I told you about. Now, I'll be the first one to say, this looks pretty messy. Pork, when you mix it up with stuff, gets pretty gluey. And adding shrimp to it doesn't make it any less gluey. So it is just what it is, but oh, so tasty. So, clean, dry surface. Put down the wonton wrapper. I recommend you buy these. They're available at just about any grocery store in the refrigerated section of the vegetable department. And you want about a tablespoon of goo. And you put it right in the middle. Now, most people will put too much in to start with. This particular quantity is only good if I am doing what I call the pyramid fold. Two corners, opposite corners go together, hold it. Other corner goes together, hold it. Press down the ridge, spin it around. I don't know we spin it around, but I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. Tuck that in, same thing, press down the ridges. And then I'm going to press the ridge down as close as I can to the filling. I'm going to get a plate. And I'm going to just start stacking them over there. You saw me blot this. There was a drop of water there. I don't want extra drops of water on there, because I don't want this to get messed up. If you're finding you're overfilling, don't. If you want to make these to be just plain crispy with no filling, you can. That's how you frequently get them at Chinese restaurants as part of your appetizers. That's what these things are. These are the little guys that they tie into a kind of a funny little purse-shaped thing. And then they deep fry them. And I'm just going to do this until I either run out of filling. I can feel the heat back here. I'm going to turn it down because I don't want it to get too hot. I want it to be hot when I'm ready, but not too hot. You can burn these if you're not careful. To be honest, they still taste pretty good even if they're burned, but I don't recommend that. They're not as pretty. And there are a dozen ways at least to tie these into some sort of a package. This is a super easy way. I really did not expect this to fold as easily as it does. The little wonton wrapper is kind of, it feels like it reminds me of a firm pasta. And the white stuff that you see on here is actually cornstarch. That's what keeps the little wrappers from sticking together. And you could put more or less of any of the ingredients that I mentioned in there. If you're a massive garlic fan, you could add more. We found that the 2 tablespoons of garlic plus the ginger and the chives was perfect. And then just a little teeny bit of oops, I forgot to wet that. I was wondering why it wouldn't stick. I'm like, why is this not sticking? Because I was too busy talking. But that shows you I screwed that up and I can still fix it. So if you have a senior moment and screw that up, it's okay. And I always keep a paper towel here because if I get meat juice on myself or ground pork or anything else, I want to be able to keep my fingers so they're not going to stick to the wontons. See, that is cornstarch. When I find that, I usually stick it on the outside. I don't know why, just do. I find the easiest way to remember with the order to do things is actually to wet the wonton first. You really don't want the wonton wrappers to dry out. If they dry out, they will crack. Now, they're still totally edible, but they're not going to make a nice, neat little package. If your nice, neat little package falls apart in the soup, you know what? It's still really delicious. If you decide to cook this in soup, do not boil them. If you boil them, they will fall apart. Which means you'll have like a noodle floating around and a little pile of meat floating around. It's still totally edible. We had a couple that got a little too squishy last night, and you got to cut them up with your spoon anyway and eat them. It's not like, you know, you're trying to create some elaborate pastry that sits there on the table and looks gorgeous. So you don't have to be too fussy about this. We really like them in our standard Chinese soup. Last night's wonton soup, which is what we called it, because we had wontons in it, was made with carrots from our garden and bok choy from our garden And actually, that was from the greenhouse. Just the wontons, and it was just wonderful. We ate every last drop, and I made enough so that both Henry and I had like 4 wontons. And you could make as many wontons to go in there as you wanted to. They were perfect. They were perfect. If you're used to working with ground beef, it just seems to me like pork is gooier. But no biggie. It's worth it for the flavor. This is going to be our first course today. If we're still hungry, I'll make a little bit of stir fry. You could make an entire meal out of this. We may. I'll think about it. They really are good. And you can choose to dip them in something. You could use sweet soy sauce. You could use regular soy sauce. You could use sweet and sour sauce. Any kind of sauce that you personally like. The Chinese mustards. There's all kinds of assorted sauces at the grocery store. Fortunately, our grocery stores carry a moderately decent selection, for being in the middle of nowhere, of soys and other things like that, because we have tourists. Okay, now I am going to take these guys. I'm going to take a little thing here. I'm going to crank this back up again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these in here and fry them